So welcome to ProfileTree TV, and today we're very excited to be talking to Mike Ball. So Mike, thank you very much for taking time out to talk to us today. And you're an expert in tourism, so I'll let you introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do.
Yeah, my name's Mike Ball, and I've been working in the tourism industry now for just over 20 years. I started out in tour ops, and now I'm a freelancer, and I generally sort of like I call myself a tourism consultant, but mainly what I get asked to do is analyses of sustainable tourism markets. So that's mainly what I concern myself with these days, although I do have a wide background within the tourism industry, tour ops, development of tourism products and destinations and things like that. So yeah, I'm a freelancer, but I do have one main client, and that is Mintel, who I've been working for a number of years now. They come to me every year. They ask me to look at various different markets. I produce market intelligence reports that look at those markets they've asked me to investigate, and then they publish them. These markets, these reports tend to be of two types. They can either be geographically defined, so we look at countries, for instance, sometimes regions as well. Though mostly these days what they ask me to look at are thematically defined markets. A simple example of that would be a tourism niche. I'm mostly concerned with, these days almost entirely concerned with a sustainable tourism market. So for instance, a niche would be ecotourism or eco-accommodation, sustainable marine tourism, that kind of thing. And the reports are pretty in-depth. We look at the global profile of these markets. The reports are up to 18,000 words. They're quantitatively based as well as qualitatively based as well. I interview key informants within those sectors, put those into the reports as well. And I'm also asked to make forecasts, both in terms of quantitative forecasts, what's going to happen economically in terms of visitor arrivals for these markets, as well as looking at various different factors which may or may not have significant impacts in these markets in the future as well.
Incredible. So truly an expert at research and understanding the tourism industry trends around what you're studying.
Yeah. The proof in the pudding is Mintel, they are a huge market intelligence provider of market intelligence in Europe and globally, and they come to me every year and they ask me again to look at various different markets for them. So,
that's not a bad endorsement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good. So how did you become interested then in tourism as a whole?
Well, I'm half Indonesian by birth, and I was brought up in Africa. So in a way, I was kind of like traveling from a very young age. My main interest, how I came to tourism, was my first degree was in ecology. And then after I did my degree in ecology, I became a VSO, that's Voluntary Service Overseas. And I went to Tanzania, and I was working on an agricultural development project. It was right out in the bush in this part of Tanzania. And it became very, very clear to me, looking at what was going on in the bush around there, that if people were going to protect the environments and wildlife and the forests and things that they lived in, they had to have a value out of it. So I came to tourism that way, and I became very interested in ecotourism. I came back, I did a master's. I wrote my thesis on ecotourism. And after that, I did a little bit of work for conservation NGOs, basically involved with education, producing textbooks about ecotourism and conservation. And then I started working for a tour operator. I worked for that tour operator for over 10 years as the adventure and ecotourism consultant. Then I became a freelancer. I still carried on working for this tour operator in a freelance basis, but I was also writing articles for magazines such as BBC Wildlife Magazine, Geographical and stuff like that, and Diver Magazine, generally news sort of things on sustainable tourism and that sort of thing. And then I came across this opportunity at Mintel, and I've been working for them ever since.
Incredible.
I'm a client now.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So, and you mentioned a lot there. Do you think in tourism in general that governmental factors, political factors, even I'm just thinking we mentioned conservation as well. Do you think all of these factors actually have an impact, positive or negative, on tourism?
They can impact positively or negatively depending on the way the government goes. The main issue, I don't want to talk too much about Brexit, but it's on everyone's lips at the moment. But if you look at Brexit, for example, it's going to have a major impact on tourism, no matter, it already is having a big impact on tourism throughout Great Britain. So, you know, government has a key influence in what happens in tourism. Tourism is a pretty unique industry in which almost everything has an impact on tourism: economics, politics, conservation, retail, utilities, construction, food industries. Almost everything impacts on tourism, and government, you know, because government has that overarching influence on all of these sectors, it has a major role to play.
Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting. You know, we'll probably look back in years to come and talk about exactly, use Brexit as an example of, you know, whatever happens, and we'll not know for years and years and years, of course, either way, the impact of it. But it'll be, again, it's a true life example of the impact that things like this can have in the economy, and you're right, in every sector. So we don't like to talk about it, but I totally agree. But still very interesting times that we sadly live in, maybe. But who knows? Time will tell. Time will tell.
Yeah.
So obviously you've written a lot of reports and you've travelled the world. So what have been your favourite topics to cover? Is it what you write about at the moment? And is there anything that you could share that you've seen on your journeys?
Because I come from a conservation background, and I can see how important sustainable tourism, or, you know, what my old professor Harold Goodwin likes to refer to as responsible tourism. I can see how important these things are for, not just for tourism, but because as we mentioned before, tourism it goes into everything. I can see how important it is for society in general. I do enjoy writing specifically about sustainable tourism niches which are close to my heart. So, for instance, wildlife tourism, conservation, eco-accommodation, sustainable tourism in marine areas. But I also, in terms of the reports, I suppose what I get the biggest kick out of is when I'm proved right. Sometimes this is for a sad reason. Like, for instance, I was a while ago, I was asked to look at Honduras as a tourism destination. At the time, this was probably about 2008, 2009. Honduras, its tourism economy was booming because some political stability had come to the country. So a lot of big donor agencies, you know, international banks and that sort of thing, were ploughing money into the economy, into things like transport, roads, utilities, all of these things which have a major impact on tourism developers' decisions to come into that country and then develop the tourism. And because I've lived abroad a lot during my lifetime in places like Africa, Southeast Asia, I knew that this stability was very fragile. It would only take something small to derail it. And I put this in my report, and sure enough, there was a coup not long after that, and the whole thing went to pot. So, you know, they went back to zero, and, you know, Honduras still has a fairly bad reputation. There's a lot of gang violence there and stuff like that, putting off tourism. Mm-hmm. So, you know, on the one hand, I was vindicated, I was right, but it was a sad sort of like thing to have to say. Now, in other sort of like ways, you know, sometimes, like I mentioned, that I have to make economic forecasts for particular markets. I was looking at South Africa. I looked at the arrivals, how much money the tourism economy was bringing into the country, and I crunched all my data, and I came up with some figures for what the market was going to be doing over the next few years. A few years later, I came back to look at the same market, and I was bang on. That was massive vindication for me. So I get a big kick out of looking at, and especially when it's a nice prediction. These things are going to do well. The country's got its tourism industry. They're doing good things. They're doing right things, and they're doing well. And yeah, so I get a big kick out of that.
Incredible. So you've obviously got a skill in looking at what a country's doing and predicting its growth going forward. So is there things that you see in countries that are doing well, or things that would you say that may be common amongst some of these countries? Maybe it's more complex than that.
It is pretty unique to each country, really. Being in tourism, as I've said it, I've said it twice already. You have to have a very rounded skill base. I think people in tourism are very, very undervalued, because you have to have a very wide skill base. You have to have a bit of knowledge of everything in order to operate successfully within this environment. And so when I look at when I write these reports, I showcase 3, sometimes 4 different countries for each report. So you look at each country, and you have to consider all of the factors. What the political situation is there at that time? What's the development situation at that time? What's the economic situation at that time? What are people? What's happening in the news and things like that? So, for instance, I was looking at Laos recently, and you look at I looked at one of the things that I found was a major factor that was affecting Laos was the marketing campaign. Now, quite often you'll look at the marketing campaign of a country, and it's either here or there. Sometimes they're very, very good ones, but this one, it was stale. It was very, very obviously stale. And this was the reason why visitor arrivals were declining. So, I've never actually had to sort of like call out a country and say, you need to look at your advertising campaign, at your branding and the way that you're marketing yourself as a destination on the world stage. It's failing. This is the reason why your visitor arrivals and your economy is in decline. It's because of you. So they are very unique. Each one you look at, you have to come at it with a fresh mind and look at it with its own unique set of factors which are affecting what's going on there.
Incredible. It's sounds so interesting, and actually I've never heard tourism, the job role in tourism being described as you did. Just having the expertise or awareness of all of these areas. You think of people, it's hard enough to do the day-to-day job,
yes,
and then
exactly.
to consider the whole, like everything as well. Incredible, and you're right. I don't think the tourism industry gets enough kudos for that. You mentioned responsible tourism and sustainable tourism. So what really is that? What would we see when we look at that?
Personally, it is many things, but I quite like the definition for responsible tourism, which is tourism which doesn't impact the ability to sort of like for future generations to come in and enjoy the tourism that those destinations offer, or to impact on the society that is offering those products and services as well. So it is really about, at the very least, not causing any negative impacts, but at its best is adding to society in general, not just to tourism, because at the end of the day, tourism is about coming and visiting another community, another society. You're being a guest in this person's environment or house, or whatever you want to, whatever way you want to look at it. And for, you know, that tourism economy to be growing and to be getting better, it has to be getting better in a holistic kind of like way. Mm-hmm. So, you know, for me, it is about that. There is the, you can look at sort of like the environmental, the social, and the economic vectors as they're referred to, and say you've got to make improvements in all three of these things. Human beings being what they are, sometimes one vector gets more attention than another. For example, when sustainable tourism first was brought to the world stage, it was simply referred to as ecotourism, because the environmental sort of like actions in the sustainability of tourism were very, very focused on the environment and conservation. After that, it moved more into a social kind of like projects and implementation of actions. So, for instance, you could see in the marketing of sustainable tourism, the trends which were driving the market at that time were very much sort of human focused. Authenticity, the ethical consumer, experientialism. It was, you know, it was about what these kind of like human factors coming into sustainable tourism. So now I think the emphasis is shifting a little bit back more towards the environment. I'm thinking especially when Prince Harry went to Malawi and he was involved in the 500 Elephants project, the amount of news that generated and how that has raised the profile of a country which was never really high on the list of safari destinations, how those actions have raised Malawi in the consciousness of the traveling public as a safari destination is massive. And other countries are tending to follow that lead now. For instance, Cambodia is becoming very aware of it needs to make a sort of like differentiator stand by highlighting environmental and conservation sustainability actions which are going on within its destination, and it's following that kind of like lead. Palau as well. Palau recently, as a diving destination, they recently banned the use of various different sunscreens because of the chemical in these sunscreens bleaches the corals. The coral is their main tourism resource, and within their specific market, scuba diving, this is going to make big waves. It's going to make a lot of news for them. It's going to garner a lot of attraction, and ethical consumers, ethical diving tourists are going to very much appreciate that.
Totally amazing. And you mentioned then the tourists themselves. So you're seeing that tourists ourselves as travelers are making conscious efforts to try and look after or go for tourist options that are benefiting the local environment.
Yeah, there are a lot of tourists who are making these conscious decisions, but there's also a lot of tourists who are buying into the sustainable tourism thing less consciously, because tourism operators are offering these kind of things. And one of the most attractive things about sustainable tourism is the products and services that you offer within a sustainable tourism or a responsible tourism framework tend to be better products and services. They are more experiential. They are authentic. Another trend which marketers quite often talk about is the storytelling aspect of an experience. This comes in from the point of view of when you're marketing the product, you know, the marketing campaign comes across like a little bit of a story, but also when you come back home, you've got stories to tell your friends and your family about what you did as well. So, you know, these people go on these holidays and then they see these things and they think, this will be great. I'll be, you know, because it's something I can tell people when I go back home. And what a fantastic thing this was. Look at what we did. That was fantastic.
And do you see a difference between cities and countries around the world? Is this a trend that's happening globally, or is it in Western Europe, or certain countries are just grabbing it and totally consuming themselves in this type of tourism?
Mostly, it's a thing which is attached to what I would call more developed tourism economies, more mature tourism economies. It's not entirely, but it is mostly to do with more mature tourism economies. Some tourism economies do it better than others. If you know, for instance, if you're looking at experientially oriented tourism campaigns, you could do a lot worse than look at California. The California campaign is incredible. Sometimes, you know, I see their adverts and I'm in awe at how many boxes they've ticked with what they do. But then other countries, they're not so good. Like, for instance, if you want to talk about an experiential, I beg your pardon, a more advanced safari destination such as Kenya. When I looked at Kenya, I think it was last year or the year before, I was quite disappointed by their tourism campaign. They just haven't seemed to moved on very well, and they haven't really grabbed they haven't really hit the mark with the storytelling and the experiential kind of like aspects which they clearly offer. I mean, if you think about some of the most amazing tourism products they've got there, safaris at Maasai owned lodges, going on, you know, walking safaris with the Maasai and things like that. These things are amazing products and services, but within the tourism consciousness out there, within the consumer consciousness, it's not hitting a very high profile at the moment. So, yeah, some people do it better than others.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that is you know, down to the marketing campaign.
Incredible. So the power of the marketing and
Yes.
selling the story of the country. I had the pleasure of many years ago doing a safari in Kenya, and it was an incredible experience, as you say, out with the warriors and being immersed in their culture. What an experience. So,
exactly. Yeah.
Once in a lifetime. Absolutely amazing. So I can understand how important it is for these countries. So do you think governments then can use tourism as a tool for economic development?
Yeah, I think you know, it is a very important tool for economic development. You know, sometimes I think it is the most important. I was brought up in, you know, when I was a teenager, I lived in Malawi, and I lived in Zambia, and I was a VSO in Tanzania as well. So, you know, I look at those economies and I see, when you've got economies which don't have an awful lot of things, you know, things like industry, what can you sell? You know, you've got your culture, you've got pretty unspoilt landscapes, you've got, you know, these are tremendous assets, and if it's done right, the benefits of selling these assets can go to the most needy people. And they can go to areas where development would otherwise not be happening at all, particularly in a rural sense, but also in urban situations as well. So I think it is a massively important thing for governments to get hold of, and to realise that development, tourism, can play a very, very key part in development. I mean, just, you know, if you look back at when the credit crunch happened here in the, you know, all across the world, but here in the UK, one of the first industries to recover was tourism. And tourism is a very interesting industry from an economic analyst point of view, because when you look at tourism and you see tourism going either declining or growing, generally speaking, the economy will follow what tourism does. Tourism is like a canary in the cage in the mine. What happens in tourism follows on in the rest of the economy, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking. So when tourism starts recovering, other sectors will follow on later. But tourism, when the credit crunch happened, the reason why tourism started to recover was because domestic tourists were holidaying at home because it was cheaper for them, but also because the exchange rate went down. So people whose economies weren't so badly affected started coming over, and they started going on holiday here in Britain. So the industry started picking up. In developing countries, such as, going back to, developing countries in Southeast Asia or Africa or Latin America, they have that exchange rate, sort of like benefit. People can go on holiday there. They can have a fantastic holiday for what to them is a decent price. You can have amazing experiences, generate great stories out of them, things that you can tell, you can tell your friends, and you can have very authentic experiences as well. Because quite often in advanced tourism economies, the tourism things that you do are very prescribed. In developing countries, you can have very authentic experiences.
Amazing.
So,
Excellent.
yeah.
So really incredible. And again, I'm just thinking, what is the growth prediction for this niche? Do you think it's going to continue to grow, the ecotourism and the responsibility? What are the trends in tourism? What should maybe tourism agencies and countries, government departments be looking at, and even entrepreneurs thinking, okay, this is a growth market, I should really focus on that and invest in that and market that?
I think sustainable tourism and responsible tourism as a whole is a growth area in tourism. Mainly from the point of view that it's just a better way of going about business. It's a better way of going about business for the practitioner because of the cost benefits. Sometimes you have to make initial investments in terms of making your energy consumption more green and those kind of like things as well. But from the point of view of the tourist, these things are much better because the product is much better. The tourist enjoys them more. They get more out of them. So for me personally, I think that it's a no-brainer. Everyone has to go down that route. I think one of the things which I would be looking at for the future is, I mentioned a little bit earlier that things come in terms of the marketing of tourism. Things are coming around more from sort of like focusing on the social benefits that tourism can bring, and they're coming around more to the environmental thing. But on an inverse way, I think marketeers or practitioners of tourism can it will be important for them to make sure that, although they're looking at the environment and conservation as a key focus of their operations, that these things benefit people within the community in which they operate, especially the most needy. So for me, pro-poor tourism, which is a kind of niche of sustainable tourism, is going to be one of the key trends that's coming up in the next few years. So although the focus is going to be on the environment and conservation and how this is being implemented by tourism practitioners and how, and demonstrating to the world how we're working to improve, not just, how we're working to improve the world, but as a key sort of like component of that, it has to be also that these benefits are going to the most poor people, and they're not being ignored. They're coming up as well.
Incredible. How interesting is that? So that'll be interesting to watch. And I'm sure we both agree it's the right way for things to go. It'd be brilliant to see that actually happen. Because sometimes the local community or the poor people don't actually benefit from the tourists coming into an area. They see it, but they don't actually benefit from it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can see that in a lot of destinations. I mean, you just think about sort of like the way that house prices are going out of, in certain destinations such as Cornwall and Devon, local people can't afford to live in their own in the areas where they were brought up. Yeah. So, things have to be done about that.
Yeah, totally. And the problem there is that people then local people start to resent the industry as opposed to work with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is the death of tourism, because you come to visit, where these people are from, their home, it's their land, that's where you're going to visit. If they don't want you there, you're not going to have that great an experience.
No, incredible. So interesting, and I think I could annoy you with questions all day, but very, very interesting to get a brief overview of what's happening in the tourism industry. So thank you very much for that, Mike. So if anyone wanted to reach out to you and talk about your expertise or get some advice, or what's the best way that they could do that?
If people want to reach out to me,
would it be to find you in LinkedIn, or what's the best way for people to
find me through LinkedIn. I also have a Twitter account as well, so people can get hold of me on Twitter. Those are the two best ways, really.
Reach out that way. So what we'll do is underneath this video, if anyone's watching the video in YouTube or watching it through an article on our site, if you look below the video, you'll find two links, one to LinkedIn and one to Twitter. So be sure to reach out and connect with Mike, and I'm sure you'll have as interesting a conversation that I just had and learn some amazing content as well, and understand what's happening in the tourism industry. So again, Mike, thank you very much for your time. That was brilliant.
Thank you, Ciaran. It's been great talking to you.
Excellent. And thank you for watching today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed the content. Be sure to check in tomorrow and we'll have another great video for you. Thank you very much. This is Ciaran from ProfileTree, the content marketing agency.